I also said I would talk to you a little bit about pie charts. So pie charts are less useful than bar graphs. They're only for specific situations. It has to be qualitative data, first of all, and it also has to be part of a whole. So if you have a situation like our pets situation, you're going to need to be focusing on which categories make up which part of the whole. So if you're making a pie chart or a circle graph, again, you're going to want to find your total. And so if I had 8 students who prefer cats, 7 dogs, 5 other, and I actually grouped these together, you might notice, because when you have a pie chart and there are 10 pieces, it's very hard to compare the size of each slice. You really only want to use a pie chart when you have a small number of categories. Otherwise, it gets pretty confusing to look at. And that's actually a tip from Microsoft. So it's something that you'll want to keep in mind professionally. Usually in the real world, you'll use software like this to make a pie chart. So I'll show you how to do that first. So you type in your different categories, and this label right here is actually going to become our title just by default. So you're going to choose a label here that is going to describe what we have pretty well. So this is the number of students who prefer each pet. And I type down my total here just for myself when I make this later, but I actually don't need it for Microsoft Excel to make me a chart. So I'm going to just delete it just to show you that. They will actually do the math themselves. So if I highlight this, and what I do is I click on the cell, and then I left click and drag, hold down and drag to select all of these cells. And then I'm going to click on the Insert tab up here. And I want to look through my charts, and I want a 2-dimensional pie chart. This type of pie chart you should really never use because it is confusing to look at. So just use a 2-dimensional pie chart always, and we'll just do a simple one here. Okay, so we have our title and we have our categories. And this is great, but we can actually give it some more labels if we click the plus button. So it already has the chart title. I'm going to click on data labels. That gives us numbers. If we click here, we can also, let's see, more options. I believe we can also show percentage. So I'll do percentage instead of value. But you could do it differently. And let's see, we have a legend. What if we show the category name inside there? That looks nice. I have a title. I have my categories, and it's neat. So if you're making it yourself, you're going to want to do these things, but you're going to need to find the total first. So we already added up our numbers and found that there were 20 total. So that's good to know because I'm going to need to write each of these as a fraction or preferably even as a percent. And then I'm going to draw my circle graph. So I know that 8 out of 20 can be simplified. Let's go ahead and get rid of this here. So 8 out of 20 can be simplified to 4/10, which can be simplified to 2/5 by dividing by 2 on the top and on the bottom both times. 7/20 cannot be simplified, and 5/20 can be simplified to 1/4 by dividing by 5 and dividing by 5. Okay, so 1/4 is really easy to draw in a circle graph. I'm going to draw a circle, but 7/20 really isn't. So in order to make it a little bit easier to draw, usually it's a good idea, and sometimes you'll even be required to do this, to turn it into a percent. So if I turn all these numbers into percents, that's going to be a fraction out of 100. Sometimes you can't just easily do the math. Sometimes you'll have to divide 7 divided by 20, and what we would get there, if we did divide 7 divided by 20, would be 35 hundredths. But in this case, it's pretty easy to multiply to get that because 20 times blank will give me 100. 20 times 5 gives me 100. So 7 times 5 will give me 35 1/100ths. And that's the same as I had over here. And 1/4, 4 times blank gives me 100. 4 times 25. And 1 times 25 gives me 25 1/100ths, which is what I would expect. A quarter of $1 is 25. And 2/5, if I multiply 5 by 20, it'll give me 100. And if I multiply 2 by 20, it gives me 40. So 40 1/100ths, 35 1/100ths, and 25. So generally it's best to start, if this is like a clock, to start at 12 o'clock and kind of make your pieces of the pie go all the way around to the top. So I'm going to start with my biggest piece, which was the cat's slice. So 40 out of 100, this 1/2 would be 50. So I'm going to start by going ahead and kind of roughing that out, and then I'll erase the lines I don't need. So that would be 50. And then if I divided this into 5 pieces, that would show me 10%. And this is my 40%, and it's the cat. And then I am going to draw in my 35 1/100ths and my 25 1/100ths. So I know that my last piece is going to be a quarter of my pie. It looks pretty close. So other is 25%. And now this last piece should be 35 1/100ths. And it looks like it's a bit smaller than the 40 and bigger than the 25, so that's a good sign. So 35 1/100ths, 35% dogs. And then I need to put my title on, which I've already described my title as the number of students who prefer each pet. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you can tell that that's not really neat, so I would need to clear it up, and I would do it on a separate sheet of paper, probably from my math, but just for your reference here. And so let's compare that to the chart that Excel made for us. So it looks pretty close, but again, this one is a lot neater. To find the right number of angles, I know that there are 360 degrees in a full circle. So I'm just going to have to change my denominator, find an equivalent fraction with 360 degrees as my denominator to find what fraction of a circle in degrees is each of these. If I do 360 divided by 100, I get 3.6. So if I multiply by 3.6 on the top and the bottom, I'll get my answer. So 25 times 3.6 equals 90. So I can write my 90 in here. And if I do, again, times 3.6 times 3.6, 40 times 3.6 gives me 144. And 35 times 3.6 gives me 126. And if I add those all up, 126 plus 144 plus 90 gives me 360, so I can just verify that they all together add up to 360. Okay, so again, that's how to make a circle graph in Excel and by hand.